In the shadow of an ancient, forgotten town, where the streets twist like serpents and the fog clings to the cracked stones as if trying to hide something sinister, there stands a mansion no one dares to approach. They call it the Blackwood Manor, though no one alive remembers who Blackwood was, only that the house has long been shrouded in darkness and whispered warnings. The locals speak in hushed tones about the family who vanished one stormy night. Father, mother, and 3 children, never to be seen again. The house has been abandoned ever since, its windows like empty eye sockets staring blankly into the void, and at night, strange sounds echo through the halls. The faint laughter of children, the scraping of unseen footsteps, and a low, guttural whisper that creeps through the walls. Some say the house breathes, inhales the fear of those who trespass, and exhales madness into their minds. It is said that if you stand outside Blackwood Manor at midnight, you can hear the heartbeat of the house itself, a slow, pounding rhythm that grows louder and faster the closer you get, until it is all you can hear, drowning out your own thoughts and driving you to the edge of sanity. One autumn evening, drawn by equal parts curiosity and bravado, a group of 5 friends, Sarah, James, Emily, Mark, and Olivia, decided to uncover the secrets hidden within the manor's decaying walls. Their footsteps crunched over dry leaves as they crossed the iron gate, the rusted hinges groaning in protest as they pushed it open, a sound swallowed quickly by the thickening fog. The air grew colder with every step, their breath visible like smoke, and the world around them seemed to darken, as if the sun had abandoned this place long ago. The front door, swollen with rot, creaked open under their trembling hands, revealing a darkened hallway lined with peeling wallpaper stained with the passage of time. The smell of damp wood and something far fouler, decay, or something worse, filled their nostrils. Inside, the house was alive in a way that defied logic. Shadows shifted without a source, darting just beyond the edges of their vision. The walls themselves seemed to pulse faintly, the wallpaper crawling with shapes that disappeared when looked at directly. Portraits of unknown faces hung crooked, their eyes seeming to follow every move with a malevolent intelligence. As they moved deeper, the floorboards creaked underfoot, whispering secrets of those long dead. They found a library, where countless books lay scattered, their pages yellowed and brittle. One book caught Emily's eye, bound in cracked black leather, its cover unmarked except for a strange symbol etched deep into its surface, a symbol that seemed to writhe and change when stared at too long. She opened it with reverence and dread, revealing frantic handwritten notes that spoke of rituals to imprison a shadow beneath the house. A darkness older than time, feeding on souls, growing stronger with every sacrifice. Suddenly, the air shifted. The temperature plunged as a suffocating black mist poured from the cracks in the floor, wrapping around the friends like living chains. Panic erupted as the mansion's true nature revealed itself. The house was a trap, a predator stalking them through endless, twisting corridors that shifted and changed, impossible to map. Doors led to nowhere. Hallways looped back upon themselves, and the reflections in broken mirrors showed twisted versions of themselves, faces distorted with fear and anguish. The whispering voices grew louder, chanting in a language older than any living tongue, promising salvation only through surrender to the darkness. One by one, the friends felt their minds unravel, shadows clawing inside their heads, erasing memories and twisting their thoughts into madness. Sarah ran screaming, only to vanish behind a door that slammed shut, leaving silence in her wake. James was found hours later, his eyes empty, muttering words in the shadow tongue, his body cold as stone. Emily, desperate, tried to burn the black book, but the flames hissed and died as the darkness swallowed the fire whole. Mark and Olivia, the last 2 left, fought to escape the mansion's grasp, but the house would not let them go. Every path led deeper into its bowels, where walls dripped with a black ichor and the floor pulsed with a heartbeat not their own. They stumbled into a hidden chamber beneath the house, where ancient symbols were carved into stone and the air thrummed with dark power. In the center, a pit gaped open, exhaling cold breath and a sound like 1,000 whispered screams. From the abyss, tendrils of shadow reached out, beckoning, promising release, offering a terrible bargain. Join the darkness or be consumed utterly. Mark and Olivia clung to each other, knowing that whatever awaited was beyond death, a fate worse than anything they had ever known. And as dawn approached, the mansion fell silent once again, its hunger sated for now. The town outside remained oblivious, but the whispers continued on the wind, and the Blackwood Manor waits patiently, ever hungry for the next curious soul's brave or foolish enough to cross its threshold and never return. As the first pale rays of sunlight filtered weakly through the grimy windows of Blackwood Manor, the town slowly awoke, unaware of the horrors trapped within the mansion's walls. The fog that had cloaked the night began to dissipate, revealing a landscape scarred by twisted trees and tangled underbrush that seemed to claw toward the house as if desperate to warn off any who dared come near. The mansion sat silent, brooding, its blackened silhouette stark against the waking sky, as if the night's terrors had never stirred there at all. But inside, something had changed, something ancient and malevolent that had stirred deeper into consciousness with the arrival of the five friends and their futile attempts to escape. Hours passed, and the town's few curious onlookers, drawn by the faint screams and strange noises heard in the dead of night, gathered at the wrought iron gate. Whispers spread like wildfire, each tale darker than the last. The vanished children, the cursed family, and now the new victims who had dared enter and never come out. The sheriff, a stoic man named Grayson, tried to dismiss the rumors, chalking the strange occurrences up to drunken fools or wild imaginations fueled by the old legends. But even he felt the cold gnawing at his bones as he approached the gate, the air growing unnaturally heavy, charged with a presence that made his skin crawl. Meanwhile, deep within the labyrinthine corridors of the manor, Mark and Olivia found themselves trapped in a chamber that seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the walls breathing softly in time with the dark heartbeat beneath the house. Their eyes adjusted to the dim, revealing ancient carvings etched deep into the stone, depictions of shadowy figures entwined with writhing serpents and eyes that glowed with unnatural light. Olivia's hand trembled as she traced one of the symbols, feeling a surge of icy dread coursing through her veins. The air was thick with a smell like burnt incense and something far fouler, like the metallic tang of blood mixed with decay. Every instinct screamed at them to flee, but the house seemed to resist, its shifting corridors sealing off every exit like the coils of some monstrous creature tightening around its prey. As they struggled to find a way out, the whispers returned, this time louder, closer, and unmistakably sinister. The voices spoke in a chorus of sibilant tones, weaving promises of power and eternal life in exchange for loyalty to the darkness that dwelled beneath the manor. Mark clenched his fists, fighting the creeping paralysis of fear, but Olivia's eyes glazed over, and she began to chant softly, the shadow language spilling from her lips as if pulled by an unseen force. Mark shook her, desperation clawing at his throat, but it was too late. Her body went limp, and the darkness claimed her as its vessel, her eyes now black voids reflecting the abyss itself. In a surge of terror and rage, Mark fled the chamber, the walls seeming to close behind him, trapping him in an ever-tightening spiral. The manor's corridors no longer obeyed the laws of reality. Stairs led down into endless darkness. Doorways opened into rooms that defied comprehension, and the very floor beneath his feet seemed to ripple like liquid shadow. Every step echoed with the voices of the lost, their pleas and warnings mingling with sinister laughter that promised that escape was impossible. Outside, Sheriff Grayson organized a search party, a handful of townsfolk brave or foolish enough to confront the evil that dwelled within the manor. Armed with lanterns, crosses, and old family relics said to ward off evil, they entered the property, their lights casting long, trembling shadows on the overgrown grounds. The fog, now returning thick and suffocating, swallowed their cries and footsteps, and the manor seemed to breathe around them, alive with hunger. One by one, the searchers were picked off, snatched by unseen hands, driven mad by visions of their deepest fears, or dragged screaming into the darkness. Only Grayson remained, his resolve hardening with every loss. Back inside, Mark stumbled through an endless maze of halls, his mind fraying as the shadows whispered secrets meant to break his spirit. He came upon a room bathed in a sickly green light, where a solitary figure knelt before a twisted altar. It was Sarah, her face pale and hollow, eyes glazed over but flickering with a faint spark of recognition. She reached out to him, voice barely a whisper, urging him to resist, to find the strength to fight the darkness that had taken her. Clutching her hand, Mark felt a surge of hope, but the room itself seemed to resist their reunion. The walls groaned and closed in, shadows slithering like living things, intent on tearing them apart. Desperately, Mark remembered the black book Emily had found, the tome that had revealed the truth about the shadow beneath Blackwood Manor. Though he could barely recall the ritual, he knew it was their only chance. With trembling hands, he began to recite the incantation, the ancient words burning like fire in his throat. The shadows screamed and writhed, the house trembling as if in pain, but the light of the ritual pushed back the darkness, illuminating the room in a brilliant, unnatural glow. Sarah's eyes cleared, and together they stood against the encroaching void, but the manor's final secret was yet to be revealed. The pit beneath the altar opened wide, and from its depths rose a form, an endless, shifting mass of shadow and eyes, a primordial evil born in the void before time itself. It spoke in a voice like shattered glass, promising eternal torment for those who defied it. Mark and Sarah, clutching each other, knew this was the true heart of the nightmare, the source of the mansion's curse. With a final, desperate cry, Mark completed the ritual, binding the shadow back into the pit with chains of light woven from the ancient word. As the first light of dawn pierced the windows, the house shuddered violently, then fell silent, the oppressive darkness retreating like a beast beaten but not destroyed. Mark and Sarah stumbled out of the manor, the air crisp and fresh, but heavy with the lingering dread of what had transpired. The town slowly woke, the fog lifting to reveal a landscape forever changed by the horrors that had unfolded. And though the Blackwood Manor stood still and silent, a faint whisper on the wind warned that the darkness was patient, waiting for the next unwary souls to cross its threshold and the nightmare to begin anew. The sun had barely risen above the horizon when Mark and Sarah finally found their way back into the town, their bodies bruised and minds shattered from the ordeal inside Blackwood Manor. The streets were eerily silent, as though the entire town held its breath, afraid to break the fragile stillness. People peered cautiously from behind cracked windows and half-open doors, their faces pale with fear and disbelief. Rumors of the night's events had already spread, painting the manor as a living nightmare that devoured those who dared enter. Yet no one dared approach the house, not anymore. Even the bravest among them whispered about the cursed place in hushed tones, warning children to stay far away, lest the darkness reach out from the shadows to claim them as well. Mark and Sarah tried to explain what they had endured, but words failed to capture the true horror of the manor's shifting halls, the sinister whispers, and the ancient evil that lurked beneath the floorboards. Sheriff Grayson, the only other survivor from the search party, met them at the edge of town. His face was weathered and grim, eyes hollow but determined. "The town's cursed," he said simply. "Not just the house. Whatever lives beneath it, it's spreading." Together, the three formed a shaky alliance, realizing that if the evil was not destroyed completely, it would only grow stronger and consume everything they loved. Over the next days, the trio pored over ancient texts and the black book Emily had found, piecing together the history of Blackwood Manor and the dark forces that had bound it to the town for centuries. They learned of a secret society, long forgotten, who had once tried to trap the shadow god in the depths beneath the manor, binding it with magic fueled by human sacrifice. But the bindings had weakened, and over the centuries the darkness had seeped out, infecting the town with madness, disappearances, and death. The townsfolk's strange behavior, the vanishings, and the growing dread were all symptoms of the Shadow's growing influence. Desperate for a solution, Mark, Sarah, and Grayson sought out the oldest resident of the town, an ancient woman named Agnes Blackwood, last of the family bloodline. She lived on the outskirts in a crumbling cottage, surrounded by wild herbs and strange talismans. Agnes was said to speak with spirits and to have knowledge beyond the natural world. When they found her, she was waiting, as if she had known they would come. Her eyes, sharp and clear despite her years, glinted with a strange light. "The darkness will never leave unless it is called back to the void," Agnes whispered, her voice like dry leaves rustling. "But the ritual to do so demands a price. The binding must be renewed with the blood of those who carry the curse, and one must willingly offer themselves to the Shadow to seal it forever." Mark's heart sank. The price was unimaginable, yet it was the only hope left. As they prepared for the ritual, the town around them continued to change. Shadows seemed to lengthen unnaturally, and the fog crept closer each night, swallowing whole streets and homes. Some townsfolk descended into madness, their eyes blackened and their voices hollow. They wandered the streets like lost souls, driven by the darkness inside them. The boundary between reality and nightmare blurred as the Shadow God's power grew, feeding on fear and despair. On the night of the ritual, the three returned to Blackwood Manor, now a twisted husk of its former self, the walls weeping with black ichor and the air thick with the scent of rot. The ground beneath the manor throbbed with a terrible heartbeat, and the sky churned with unnatural storms. They descended into the depths once more, to the altar room where Mark had first faced the Shadow God. Agnes began the incantation, weaving words that shimmered with ancient power, while Sarah and Grayson prepared the protective wards. Mark stood at the center, the weight of the decision crushing his spirit. The Shadow God stirred, sensing the impending sacrifice. The air grew cold and heavy, shadows coiling like serpents around their feet, whispering promises of power, immortality, and revenge. Mark's vision blurred, the darkness tugging at his soul, showing him visions of endless torment or unending dominion if he gave in. But he knew what he had to do. With a steady hand, Mark raised the ceremonial dagger, its blade gleaming with runes. As the ritual reached its climax, he made the ultimate sacrifice, offering his own blood to bind the Shadow God back into the abyss. His scream echoed through the caverns as chains of light burst from the altar, wrapping the Shadow in unbreakable bonds forged by his will. The manor shook violently, the ground trembling beneath them as the darkness fought back with every ounce of its ancient power. But the light held firm, and slowly the shadows receded, sucked back into the pit from which they came. The air cleared, and the heavy weight that had suffocated the town lifted like a terrible dream fading with the dawn. When Mark finally collapsed, his blood soaked into the stone, the three survivors emerged from the manor into a new dawn. The town seemed reborn. Birds sang, children laughed, and the fog lifted entirely for the first time in decades. But the price had been paid. Mark's sacrifice had sealed the Shadow God away, but it had taken his life and left behind a lingering darkness in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. Grayson and Sarah vowed to protect the town and keep the secret safe, guarding the Black Book and the knowledge of what lay beneath Blackwood Manor. The townsfolk slowly returned to normal, but a deep unease remained, a reminder that the shadows never truly disappear. They only wait for the next opening, the next moment of weakness, to return. And so, Blackwood Manor stands still and silent once more, its windows dark and empty, a monument to the sacrifices made and the horrors faced. The shadows beneath it lie chained, for now, but the whispers on the wind warn that the darkness is patient, eternal, and hungry for the day it will rise again. Years passed in the town of Blackwood, the scars of the past slowly fading from memory, but never truly disappearing. The manor stood untouched, a grim sentinel on the edge of the forest, its dark silhouette a constant reminder of the terror that had once gripped the land. Life returned to a fragile normalcy, with children playing in the streets and the markets bustling as if the horrors of the Shadow God were merely a nightmare from which the town had finally awoken. But beneath the surface, a tension simmered, an unspoken fear that the darkness was not gone, only waiting. Sarah and Sheriff Grayson became the unlikeliest guardians of the town's fragile peace, bound by the secret they shared and the blood price paid by Mark. They watched the manor from afar, aware that the black book they had buried beneath the floorboards in the town's old library contained not only the ritual to bind the Shadow God, but also cryptic warnings about the cost of vigilance. Agnes Blackwood's final words haunted them. The shadow sleeps, but it dreams of freedom. One cold autumn evening, as the wind howled through the skeletal branches of dying trees, a strange visitor arrived in Blackwood. Cloaked in a tattered robe, the figure moved with an unnatural grace, eyes gleaming with a cold fire. He introduced himself as Elias Crow, a scholar of forbidden lore and ancient curses, who had come in search of the truth buried beneath the manor. Sarah and Grayson were wary, but they sensed something different about him, a knowledge deeper than their own, and a hunger to confront the darkness head-on. Elias revealed that he had been tracking the Shadow God's influence across distant lands, tracing its tendrils through forgotten cults and cursed relics. He spoke of a prophecy hidden in the Black Book's margins, a prophecy that foretold not just the Shadow God's imprisonment, but its eventual rebirth through a chosen vessel. That vessel, he claimed, was no other than the bloodline of the Blackwoods, a lineage cursed to carry the Shadow's legacy until the end of days that Sarah's breath caught. She was Agnes's granddaughter, unknowingly entwined in the ancient curse. The weight of her heritage pressed down on her like a shroud. Elias warned that the ritual performed years ago was only a temporary seal. The Shadow God's essence lingered within the manor's walls, growing stronger as the bloodline continued. If left unchecked, the darkness would awaken fully, consuming everything in its path. Determined to protect her family and the town, Sarah agreed to work with Elias and Grayson to uncover the manor's deepest secrets and strengthen the binding. They ventured once again into the depths beneath Blackwood Manor, armed with knowledge, ancient wards, and a desperate hope. The air grew thick with malice as they descended, shadows stretching and twisting like living things. Whispers filled the chambers, speaking in tongues long forgotten, trying to break their resolve. In the deepest chamber, they discovered a hidden crypt sealed with runes pulsing faintly with dark energy. Inside lay the remains of the original Blackwood ancestors, their bodies twisted in agony, bound in chains forged of light and shadow. A spectral figure appeared, Agnes herself, trapped between worlds, warning them of the Shadow's true nature. Not a god, but a parasitic entity born from the collective fear and despair of generations, feeding on the souls of the cursed bloodline to manifest in the physical world to break the cycle. They would need to perform a ritual more dangerous than any before. A ritual of cleansing that could sever the Shadow's hold forever, but at great risk. The ritual demanded the sacrifice of the bloodline's purest member to absorb and destroy the darkness from within. The choice fell to Sarah, who faced the terrifying prospect of losing herself to save everyone she loved. As they prepared for the final confrontation, the manor itself seemed to fight against them. Walls bled, floors cracked open to reveal abyssal chasms, and monstrous shadows clawed at their souls. Sarah's mind teetered on the brink of madness, visions of the Shadow God's hunger clawing inside her, promising power and salvation if she surrendered. But with Elias and Grayson's support, she held fast, embracing her destiny. The cleansing ritual began under a blood-red moon, ancient chants echoing through the manor's halls. Sarah stepped into the center of a glowing sigil, the Shadow God's essence drawn from the darkness into her very being. Pain unlike any other tore through her as the parasite struggled to survive, clawing at her soul, But Sarah's will was stronger. With a final cry, she unleashed a burst of light that shattered the manor's cursed foundations and sent the shadow god screaming back into the void. The aftermath was silent but profound. The manor's oppressive weight lifted, the shadows retreating for good. Sarah's body lay still, her sacrifice complete, but her spirit lived on in the hearts of those she saved. Elias and Grayson vowed to honor her memory, guarding the town and the Black Book to prevent the darkness from ever returning. Blackwood remained haunted, not by shadows, but by the memory of those who fought to keep the night at bay. And somewhere, in the quiet spaces between worlds, the light of a brave soul shone eternal, a beacon against the encroaching dark. Despite the manor's curse being broken and the shadow god banished, the town of Blackwood found itself forever changed. The years that followed were a fragile peace, but the darkness that once gripped the land had left its mark, not only in the scars of those who lived through it, but in the very soil, the trees, and the air that whispered secrets no one dared fully listen to. Though Sarah's sacrifice had sealed the shadow's fate, the townspeople knew that evil never truly dies. It only waits, biding its time, lurking in the corners of memory and shadow. Elias Crow and Sheriff Grayson became guardians not just of the town, but of the fragile legacy Sarah had left behind. They knew the Black Book remained, tucked away beneath the library's cracked floorboards, a tome of ancient knowledge and dark warnings. Over the years, Elias pored over its pages, seeking ways to fortify the bindings, while Grayson kept watch over the town, wary of any sign that the darkness might stir once more. Yet for all their vigilance, something unseen began to weave itself into Blackwood's fate. Like a slow poison threading through the years, it began subtly. Animals disappearing from the forests, strange figures glimpsed at dusk, eerie lights flickering in the manor's windows long after it had been declared abandoned. Children spoke in whispers of shadow that watched them from the woods, a cold breath that brushed their necks in the dead of night. Old-timers muttered about the Blackwood curse returning, even though no one could say for certain what shape it might take this time. The town's unease grew, an undercurrent of dread beneath the surface of everyday life. One cold winter's night, a desperate knock shattered the quiet. A young woman, eyes wild with fear, stumbled into the sheriff's office. She claimed to have escaped from the manor itself, that she had been drawn there by a voice calling her name, a whisper promising answers and salvation. Sarah's name. The townsfolk, ever cautious, told her tales of the past, but she was insistent. Something was wrong. Something had awakened beneath the manor, and it was hungry. Elias and Grayson listened carefully as she spoke of shadows moving like living things, of chilling laughter echoing through empty halls, and of a figure cloaked in darkness who had spoken to her in riddles, promising the return of power and the release of ancient wrath. Though wary, Elias recognized the signs. The shadow god's essence had not vanished entirely. It had merely taken refuge, waiting for a new host, a new way to manifest. The trio, now joined by the frightened woman named Miriam, descended once again into the manor's depths. This time, the air was colder, heavier, saturated with a malevolence far older and more cunning than before. The walls seemed to breathe, the floorboards groaning underfoot as if alive. Shadows danced just beyond sight, flickering and shifting like smoke in a windless room. Miriam's terror was palpable. She trembled with every step, yet pressed forward, drawn by the unseen force's cruel promise. In the heart of the manor, they found a hidden chamber untouched by light or time. Inside lay a black altar, pulsing with a sickly green glow, surrounded by twisted symbols etched deep into the stone floor. The shadow god's voice filled the chamber, low and hypnotic, weaving promises of power, immortality, and revenge against those who had chained it for so long. Miriam fell to her knees, entranced, but Elias's voice cut through the haze, reciting words and chants from the Black Book, forcing her back from the brink. Suddenly, the chamber exploded in darkness as shadows surged forward, coalescing into monstrous forms. twisted shapes of nightmare, each born from fear and pain, each a fragment of the shadow god's fragmented soul. Grayson drew his weapon, Elias wielded ancient talismans, and Miriam, struggling to resist, found strength in her newfound resolve. The battle was fierce, a dance of light and shadow that tore at their minds and bodies. But together they held the creatures a wife in a moment of clarity. Miriam realized that the shadow god sought a new vessel. Her bloodline, tied unknowingly to the Blackwoods, was the final key to its rebirth. To save the town, she would have to make a choice as Sarah once did, to sacrifice herself and absorb the darkness, breaking its cycle forever. The realization shattered her, but she steeled herself, knowing that her fate was intertwined with the shadows that haunted Blackwood. As the ritual began beneath the blood moon, Miriam chanted word from the Black Book, her voice steady despite the cold terror clawing at her soul. The manor trembled, ancient stones cracking as light and shadow clashed in a furious storm. The shadow god fought within her, promising eternal life and power beyond imagining if she surrendered. But Miriam's will burned brighter. With a final scream that echoed through the manor's halls, she released a wave of cleansing light that banished the darkness once and for all. The manor fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting as dawn broke over Blackwood. Miriam's body lay still, but her sacrifice had saved the town from eternal night. Elias and Grayson swore to guard her memory in the Black Book, knowing that darkness was never truly gone, but could always be kept at bay by those willing to stand in the light. Blackwood remained a place of quiet vigilance, forever marked by the courage of those who faced the shadow god and chose to fight rather than flee. The shadows still lingered, but now they knew that even in the darkest night, the light of sacrifice and hope could burn eternal. Years slipped by since Miriam's sacrifice, and Blackwood seemed to settle into an uneasy peace that was as fragile as the mist that curled through its ancient forests. The manor, now a shadow of its former self, stood silent and crumbling on the hill, its windows darkened and its gates rusted shut. Yet, even in its silence, the manor whispered to those who dared to listen, a faint echo of the darkness that once thrived within its walls. Elias Crow, now older and more weathered, continued his vigil over the town and the Black Book, which he kept hidden deep beneath the town library, locked away behind wards and seals crafted from old magic and iron will. Sheriff Grayson, having retired from his post, became a quiet historian of the town's darkest days, recording in secret journals the events that most wished to forget. But the town of Blackwood had changed in more ways than just its surface. The people carried shadows in their eyes, memories of nights haunted by cold breaths and unseen eyes watching from the treetops. Children grew wary of the woods, and elders whispered warnings of a darkness that never truly died. It simply waited. Whispers grew louder of strange happenings in the surrounding wilderness. Disappearances, eerie lights, and distorted shapes glimpsed through fog and moonlight. Some said the shadow god's banishment had only been temporary, that its essence had seeped into the land itself, slowly twisting nature, corrupting the very roots of the earth. One such whisper took form in the life of a young man named Thomas Wren, a newcomer to Blackwood, drawn to the town by stories of the manor and its curse. Thomas was a scholar, fascinated by folklore and the supernatural, seeking to uncover truths buried beneath layers of myth and fear. Unlike the townsfolk, who avoided the manor and its dark past, Thomas saw a puzzle to be solved, a mystery to be unraveled. Ignoring warnings, he ventured to the manor's edge one fog-drenched evening, feeling the chill of the air deepen as he approached the broken iron gates. The manor's silhouette loomed like a tombstone against the night sky, its broken windows staring like empty eye sockets. Inside, Thomas felt a presence, an oppressive weight that pressed down on his chest, a whisper just beyond hearing that teased at the edges of his sanity. The manor was not dead. It breathed with a slow, rhythmic pulse, as if the very walls held a beating heart of darkness. His flashlight flickered, Shadows danced just beyond its beam, and the air grew thick with the scent of decay and something older, something ancient and hungry. Deeper into the manor, he discovered an unmarked door hidden behind a veil of cobwebs and dust. As he pushed it open, a cold wind swept through the room, carrying with it the faintest echo of a voice calling his name. The room beyond was a chamber carved into the bedrock beneath the manor, walls lined with strange symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when not directly looked at. In the center stood a pedestal, atop which rested a small, black crystal pulsing with an eerie light. As Thomas reached out, the crystal flared, sending shards of shadow racing through the room like serpents of smoke. The shadows coalesced into a figure cloaked in darkness, the shadow god's essence, diminished but not destroyed, clinging to life in this fragment. It spoke, voiced like a cold whisper in the wind, promising Thomas knowledge beyond mortal reach, power to bend reality itself if he would only accept. Thomas hesitated, torn between fear and fascination, but the shadow's promise ignited a dangerous curiosity. He took the crystal, feeling a cold fire burn into his palm, and with that touch, the curse of Blackwood reawakened. Outside, the town's fog thickened, the woods grew darker, and the shadows lengthened. Strange events followed. People falling ill with nightmares that bled into waking life, animals twisted into grotesque parodies of themselves, and the air filled with a low, mournful hum that unsettled even the bravest. Elias and Grayson, alerted by the sudden resurgence of darkness, rushed to Thomas's aid, but they found him changed, eyes gleaming with unnatural light, speech laced with riddles and ancient tongues. The shadow, God's influence, gnawed at his mind, threatening to consume his humanity. Together, they delved into forbidden rites from the Black Book, seeking a way to sever the bond between Thomas and the shadow fragment before it could regain full power. The battle was as much mental as physical, a war of wills fought in dreams and in the twisting corridors of the manor's cursed depths. As the final confrontation neared, the manor itself seemed to awaken, walls shifting like living flesh, rooms rearranging into a labyrinth of torment designed to break intruders. Shadows writhed and clawed at Elias and Grayson as they fought to reach Thomas, whose soul teetered on the edge of oblivion. In a desperate act of sacrifice, Elias used the last of his strength and magic to bind the shadow crystal to a chain forged from silver and sacred iron, imprisoning the dark essence once more, but at great cost. The manor began to collapse, the ground trembling as the darkness fought to escape. Grayson barely dragged Elias out as the manor crumbled into ruins, burying the cursed chamber beneath tons of stone and earth. Thomas was saved but forever marked by the darkness, his mind a fragile battleground between light and shadow. The town breathed a tentative sigh of relief, but the elders knew better. Evil may be caged, but it is never truly defeated. Blackwood's legacy of darkness was far from over, and the cycle of sacrifice and shadow would continue as long as curiosity and fear walked hand in hand beneath the watchful eyes of the manor on the hill. The fragile peace that had settled over Blackwood after the manor's collapse was nothing more than a deceptive calm before the storm. Though the physical walls of the cursed estate had crumbled, the darkness that had seeped into the land had not been so easily contained. The soil itself seemed tainted, and a sinister pulse ran through the roots of the ancient trees, whispering secrets to the wind that only the bravest, or the most foolish, dared to hear. Thomas Wren, haunted by what he had endured, became a recluse, his once vibrant curiosity twisted into paranoia and dread. He roamed the outskirts of Blackwood like a ghost himself, eyes darting into every shadow, voice trembling whenever the wind carried a strange sound. The townsfolk, already burdened by generations of fear, grew restless as rumors of Thomas's strange behavior spread. Some believed he was cursed, a vessel for the shadow god's lingering will. Others whispered that the darkness had infected him beyond repair, that he might one day become the very monster they feared. Among them was Alara Finch, a young woman with an insatiable thirst for knowledge and a heart braver than most. Unlike the others, Alara refused to let fear dictate her life. She had studied the Black Book in secret, deciphering its cryptic warnings and ancient lore. She knew the Shadow God was not simply a creature to be fought with swords or bullets. It was an entity woven into the fabric of Blackwood's history and soil, a sickness that required understanding, not just exile. Alara sought out Thomas, hoping to reach the man buried beneath the creeping madness. She found him in a broken cabin on the edge of the forest, pale and gaunt, eyes hollow yet flickering with a faint spark of the man he once was. Their conversations were fragmented and haunted, Thomas's words laced with visions of darkness stretching beyond the manor's ruin. Visions of a creeping shadow that moved like a living stain across the land, consuming light and hope. Alara realized then that the Shadow God's essence had fractured, spreading into countless shards hidden throughout the forests, the earth, and even within the townspeople themselves. With a newfound purpose, Alara gathered a small group of allies, each marked by strange occurrences or uncanny talents. There was Marcus, a woodsman with uncanny senses who could track creatures no ordinary man could see. Lillian, a healer whose remedies worked even in the face of unnatural ailments. And Father Calder, a priest versed in forgotten rites and exorcisms. Together, they embarked on a quest to cleanse Blackwood of the shadow fragments before the darkness could reclaim its full power. Their journey led them deeper into the woods than any had dared to go in generations, into the heart of a place the old maps called the Hollow, a twisted, labyrinthine valley where the shadows were thick enough to suffocate light. In the Hollow, the air was heavy with malevolence, thick with a creeping cold that chilled to the bone. Trees gnarled into grotesque shapes towered above them, their branches like clawed hands reaching for flesh. The ground was slick with rot, and whispers slithered through the air, calling out in voices that sounded like loved ones lost or twisted echoes of their own fears. It was here they found the first shard, a jagged piece of the Shadow God's essence, embedded in an ancient stone altar, pulsing with a dark light that seemed to warp reality itself. Attempting to remove the shard triggered a violent surge of energy that nearly tore the group apart, but with Lillian's healing touch and Father Calder's prayers, they managed to contain it. Their success, however, was short-lived. The forest itself seemed to awaken in fury, branches slashing like whips and unseen creatures stalking their every step. It became clear that the land was alive with the Shadow's will, resisting every attempt to purge it. As days bled into nights, their resolve was tested by nightmares, hallucinations, and growing distrust. The Shadow whispered temptations, offering power, knowledge, and freedom from pain in exchange for surrender. Marcus, usually steady and strong, began to falter, his mind slowly unraveling under the relentless assault. Alara, aware that the darkness sought to break them from within, pushed her companions onward, even as the weight of despair threatened to crush her spirit. Each shard they found brought them closer to understanding the Shadow God's true nature, an ancient entity born from fear itself, a primordial force feeding on the collective dread and sorrow of humanity. It was not merely a god or demon, but a reflection of the darkness that lurked in every soul. To defeat it, they realized they would have to confront not only the physical manifestations of shadow, but the darkness within themselves. Their quest led them to the final shard, hidden beneath the roots of the oldest tree in Blackwood, a towering, twisted behemoth known to the townsfolk as the Heartwood. This tree was said to be the first seed planted when the world was young, a silent sentinel watching over the land's deepest secrets. As they approached, the shadows thickened into a suffocating veil, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The Heartwood pulsed with a malevolent life, its bark writhing like living skin, and at its core lay the largest shard yet, glowing with a terrible beauty. In the moments before the final confrontation, Alara felt the weight of every loss, every sacrifice, and every whisper of fear that had haunted Blackwood for centuries. But she also felt something else, a flicker of hope, fragile and bright, born from the courage of those who refused to bow to darkness. With a steady hand, she reached out, ready to face the shadow god's lingering essence once and for all, knowing that the fate of Blackwood, and perhaps the world, rested on what came next. Alera's fingers brushed against the cold, pulsating shard embedded deep within the Heartwood's core, and the air seemed to shatter in 1,000 unseen pieces. The darkness recoiled like a living thing, a scream of pure void rippling through the forest as shadows twisted and writhed, trying desperately to hold onto their last fragment of power. For a moment, everything stood still. The trees, the wind, even time itself felt suspended in that breathless instant before the inevitable collapse. But Alera was not alone. Behind her, Marcus's faltering steps steadied as he raised his hand, drawing a circle of faint light that pulsed with protective energy, while Father Calder intoned an ancient prayer that seemed to slice through the creeping night like a blade of dawn. As the shard finally slipped free from the gnarled roots, a ripple of darkness exploded outward, a wave that threatened to swallow them whole. But the group stood firm, their joined wills forming a fragile barrier against the shadow's fury. The forest erupted into chaos, branches crashing down like thunderbolts, unseen creatures screaming as they were banished back into the void. And in that violent storm of light and dark, Alera felt something stir within herself, a strange resonance, as if the shard's dark energy was awakening a hidden power deep in her soul. She staggered backward, clutching the shard, her mind swimming with visions, glimpses of the shadow god's origin, a primordial force born from mankind's collective fears, loneliness, and despair, feeding on every whispered nightmare and sorrowful tear shed through the ages. But in these visions, she also saw a sliver of hope, a possibility to reshape that darkness, to heal it rather than destroy it. The shard was not merely a weapon. It was a seed of change, a key to breaking the cycle of fear that had haunted Blackwood for generations. Before Alera could process the flood of revelations, a chilling voice echoed through the hollow, a voice that sounded both ancient and intimately familiar. "You think you can end me?" It hissed, a cold, cruel laughter riding the wind. From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in shifting darkness, its eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. The shadow god's essence, though fractured, had not vanished. It had taken shape, a twisted form born from all the darkest fears of Blackwood's past. The creature moved with unnatural grace, weaving between the trees as if the forest itself obeyed its command. Its voice dripped with venom as it taunted them, reminding Alera and her companions of every failure, every loss, every fear they carried inside. But the group stood unbroken. Marcus's eyes burned with fierce determination. Lillian's hands glowed with healing light, ready to mend wounds both physical and spiritual. Father Calder raised his crucifix high, channeling ancient rites of protection, and Alera, clutching the shard, stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "We are not afraid anymore," she declared, the shard's dark glow responding to her courage, flickering like a heartbeat in sync with hers. "Your reign of terror ends here." The battle that followed was not one of mere weapons and brute force. It was a war of wills and souls. The shadow god lashed out with tendrils of darkness, each strike seeking to unravel their sanity and ignite their deepest fears. Alera felt the shadows clawing at her mind, whispering lies of despair and hopelessness, but she pushed back, drawing strength from the memories of those who had stood against darkness before her, from the love and courage that still flickered within the people of Blackwood. With each pulse of the shard, the darkness weakened, cracking like glass under pressure. But the shadow god's fury only grew, becoming more desperate and violent, warping the very fabric of reality around them. The forest trembled, the sky darkened, and time seemed to fracture. In that moment, Alera understood the true nature of the shadow god. It was a reflection of their own fears, but also a test of their resolve to rise above them. Summoning every ounce of willpower, Elara channeled the shard's energy inward, letting it merge with her own spirit. A radiant light burst forth, cutting through the darkness like the dawn breaking a long, endless night. The shadow god screamed, its form unraveling into nothingness as the curse that had plagued Blackwood for centuries was finally broken. The forest began to breathe again, the suffocating shadows receding, and for the first time in generations, the air was filled with a quiet peace. Exhausted but victorious, Elara and her companions emerged from the hollow, changed forever. They had faced the darkness both around them and within themselves, and had emerged stronger. Blackwood's curse had been lifted, but the scars remained, a reminder of the price of fear and the power of hope. As the sun rose over the ancient trees, the people of Blackwood began to rebuild, not just their homes, but their lives, free from the shadow's oppressive grip. And though the shadow god was gone, Elara knew that darkness was never truly defeated. It only waits for new fears to feed on. But now, armed with knowledge and courage, she vowed that Blackwood would never again fall so easily. The shadows might return, but so would the light. The morning light filtered softly through the newly awakened canopy of Blackwood Forest, casting dappled shadows that no longer carried the weight of menace, but instead seemed to dance with tentative hope. Elara stood at the edge of the village, the shard now dull and inert in her palm. Its power expended, yet its presence a permanent reminder of the darkness they had faced and the fragile peace that had been won. The villagers emerged cautiously from their homes, faces pale but alive, eyes wide with disbelief and cautious optimism. Children who had never known what it was to play freely ran to and fro, chasing the shafts of sunlight as if testing the boundaries of this newfound freedom. Yet beneath the surface, a profound unease lingered, a whisper that the battle might have been won, but the war was far from over. Elara's thoughts turned inward, tracing the fractured paths of the journey that had led her here. She remembered the faces of those who had fallen, the sacrifices made not just by herself, but by Marcus, Lillian, Father Calder, and so many others who had stood resolute against the encroaching night. Their memories were etched into her soul, and she felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on her shoulders. The shard had been the key, yes, but it had also been a mirror, reflecting the darkness inside every soul in Blackwood. A darkness born not just from the shadow god, but from generations of fear, mistrust, and sorrow. The village council convened that afternoon beneath the ancient oak in the town square, its limbs still strong and sprawling despite the years of shadow. The elders spoke of rebuilding, of reclaiming the lands, and restoring the traditions that had been lost to fear and superstition. But Elara knew that the true restoration had to go deeper. The people needed to confront their own shadows, the unseen terrors that lurked in their hearts, the grudges, the doubts, the isolation. If these were not faced, the darkness would find a way back. As twilight descended, Elara gathered her closest allies around a small fire, the flickering flames casting warm light against their weary faces. Marcus, ever pragmatic, voiced the thought that lingered in all their minds. The shard was silent now, its magic spent, but what of the power it had once held? Could it be rekindled? Or had they merely delayed the inevitable? Lillian, her eyes bright with healing light, reminded them that hope was a force stronger than any shadow, that their unity was the true power that could withstand any darkness. Father Calder nodded solemnly, sharing ancient wisdom of balance, of light and dark, creation and destruction, and the eternal cycle that bound all things. That night, as Elara lay beneath a sky scattered with stars, she felt a stirring within, a call from deep inside the forest, beyond where any villager dared to tread. It was a whisper, faint but insistent, beckoning her to return to the Heartwood Hollow. She knew the shard was only part of the story. The forest itself held secrets yet unrevealed, secrets that could either fortify their victory or undo it all. The journey was not over, not by far. The next days were marked by preparation. Elara trained with Marcus in combat, refining their strategies for any shadow that might rise again. She learned from Lillian the delicate art of healing, not just wounds of the flesh, but those of the spirit. Father Calder led meditations and ceremonies that reminded the villagers of their shared strength and the power of faith, no matter what form it took. And beneath it all, Ilara felt the pull of the forest growing stronger, an ancient presence calling her deeper. On the dawn of the seventh day, she stepped into the Heartwood Hollow once more, this time without the shard, only her resolve and a small satchel of herbs and talismans. The forest greeted her with silence. The usual chorus of birds and insects hushed, as if the earth itself awaited what was to come. The trees, ancient sentinels of time, seemed to lean inward, their branches forming a cathedral of green and shadow. Ilara moved forward carefully, her senses sharpened, every rustle and breath of wind a potential sign. Deeper into the hollow, she found a circle of stones covered in strange runes glowing faintly with an ethereal light. This was no ordinary place. It was a convergence point, a nexus where the veil between worlds thinned, where the shadow god's essence had once been strongest. Kneeling within the circle, Ilara closed her eyes and reached out with her mind, seeking the truth hidden beneath the surface of reality. Visions flooded her. Images of the shadow god's origin not as an evil force, but as a guardian twisted by pain and neglect, a being born from humanity's desperate need to protect itself from the unknown. She saw how the darkness was once a shield, a cloak woven to hide from horrors far beyond human comprehension. But over centuries, it had been corrupted by fear and hatred. To truly end the curse, Ilara realized, they had to heal this ancient wound, to face not just the shadow god's outward form, but the pain it embodied. As the sun set, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, Ilara returned to the village with a heavy heart but renewed purpose. The task ahead was daunting. This was not a battle of blades or spells, but one of compassion, understanding, and courage. She would need to unite the villagers in ways never before imagined, guiding them to confront their own fears and embrace the darkness within as a part of the light. And so, as Blackwood slowly stirred from its long nightmare, the true journey began, not just to defeat a shadow god, but to reclaim the very soul of a people, to weave a new story from the threads of fear and hope, darkness and light. Ilara knew that many nights of terror still lay ahead, that shadows would rise and fall like tides. But with each step forward, the village grew stronger, their hearts more steadfast. The forest watched silently, ancient and eternal, as a new dawn broke over Blackwood. One forged not by the absence of darkness, but by the courage to face it. The days that followed were unlike any the village of Blackwood had ever known. The villagers, once steeped in fear and silence, began to stir with newfound purpose. Ilara's revelation about the shadow god, the truth that it was a twisted guardian born of pain and protection, had unsettled many, but it had also sparked a flicker of hope. Slowly, they understood that the darkness they feared was not a force to be destroyed, but a part of themselves to be embraced, understood, and healed. Ilara spent her mornings teaching the villagers the ancient meditations Father Calder had shared with her, adapted with Lillian's gentle healing methods. These gatherings grew from small, hesitant groups to large assemblies beneath the great oak tree, where stories were shared, wounds both physical and emotional were acknowledged, and rituals of forgiveness and acceptance were performed. The village transformed into a place of both quiet reflection and lively community, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that had gripped it for generations. But even as the village healed, Ilara knew the deeper work awaited her in the forest. The Heartwood Hollow had not yet revealed all its secrets. One evening, as twilight deepened and the forest seemed to hold its breath, a soft glow emanated from the circle of stones. Drawn again to the ancient site, Ilara approached cautiously. The runes pulsed with a rhythm like a heartbeat, alive and aware. As she stepped into the circle, a voice echoed in her mind, neither cruel nor kind, but heavy with sorrow and longing. "You seek to heal," it whispered. "But can you embrace the pain that birthed me? Can you face the darkness without turning away? Alara answered with steady resolve. I will face whatever is needed to save my people. The voice paused. Then the ground beneath her trembled slightly. From the shadows emerged a figure, not monstrous, but human in shape and sorrowful in presence. It was the shadow god, no longer an embodiment of terror, but a weary guardian bound by chains of anguish. Its eyes held millennia of loneliness, and its voice was like the rustle of dead leaves. I am not your enemy, it said. I'm the wound left by fear, the scar of forgotten pain. To free your village, you must heal me first. Alara reached out, her hands trembling yet steady. She saw the tendrils of darkness woven through the figure's form, shadows that were both a prison and a shield. Drawing upon the lessons learned from Lillian and Father Calder, she began to chant ancient words of healing, her voice weaving through the night air like a soothing balm. Light and shadow danced around them, merging and intertwining, as if the forest itself was breathing with them. The villagers, sensing the powerful ritual, gathered at the forest's edge, their lanterns casting a circle of light in the darkness. They joined their voices with Alara's in song and prayer, a chorus of hope and courage that filled the night with a palpable energy. The shadow god's form began to shift, its chains dissolving into petals of light that drifted upward and vanished into the stars. As dawn broke, the figure smiled, a serene, grateful smile, and slowly faded, leaving behind only the soft rustle of leaves and a peace that felt ancient and profound. The darkness that had haunted Blackwood was not gone, but transformed, no longer a curse, but a reminder of resilience and the power of compassion. In the days that followed, Blackwood flourished like never before. The villagers rebuilt homes with hands united, gardens blossomed where barren earth had lain, and laughter returned to the streets. Alara stood among them, not as a hero bound by fate, but as a guide who had shown them the strength within their own hearts. Yet, as with all great stories, there remained whispers of distant lands where shadows still lingered, of other guardians bound by pain, waiting for someone brave enough to heal them. Alara knew her journey was far from over. The world was wide, and the shadows were many. But for now, in this village nestled within the ancient forest, light and dark danced together in harmony, a testament to the enduring strength of hope, courage, and the human spirit. Though peace had settled softly over Blackwood, the whispers of the forest were never truly silent. Alara often found herself drawn back to the edge of the woods where the shadows still danced at twilight, their forms flickering like secrets just out of reach. The village thrived, yes, but deep beneath the roots of the ancient trees, an uneasy energy stirred. Something old, something patient, waiting for its moment to rise again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the horizon blazed with amber fire, Alara stood near the stone circle once more. The air was thick with the scent of moss and earth, and the forest hummed with life. It was then that she noticed a faint trail of light weaving through the underbrush, tiny, glowing orbs drifting like fireflies, but too purposeful, too deliberate. Her heart quickened with both hope and apprehension. Following the glowing path, Alara ventured deeper into the forest than ever before. The trees grew taller and denser, their branches weaving a cathedral ceiling of leaves above her. The air grew cooler, tinged with the smell of damp stone and forgotten memories. The path led her to a hidden glade, where the ground was carpeted with delicate white flowers that shimmered faintly in the dusk. At the center of the glade stood a figure cloaked in shadow, but unlike the shadow god she had faced before, this presence was slender, almost fragile, with eyes that gleamed like stars caught in a midnight sky. The figure's voice was soft, almost a whisper carried on the wind. Alara, the guardian of Blackwood, you have healed much, but there are wounds deeper than even the forest can mend. Alara stepped forward cautiously. Who are you? What is this place? I am the keeper of forgotten things, the figure said, the memory of all that has been lost, hidden beneath the roots and stones. I watch over the echoes of pain, sorrow, and regret that no one dares to remember. You have freed one shadow, but many remain, spirits bound by grief and rage, twisting into darkness. The glade seemed to pulse with an eerie energy as the keeper extended a pale hand. In it lay a small, cracked mirror, its surface rippling like water. Look into this, and you will see what lies beneath the shadows you've banished. Ilara hesitated, then reached out and touched the mirror's surface. Instantly, visions flooded her mind. Faces of those long dead, lost children crying for justice, betrayed souls whose stories had been erased by time. The mirror showed her the village's buried past, the violence, betrayals, and sacrifices that had sown the seeds of darkness in Blackwood's soil. She gasped, staggering back. How can I make amends for this? How can I heal what happened so long ago? The keeper's voice was gentle but firm. By remembering, by telling the truth. The shadows feed on silence and lies, but they wither in the light of honesty. Your task is to bring these stories to the surface, to honor those forgotten, and in doing so, to break the chains that bind their spirits. Ilara knew this meant returning to the village not just as a healer, but as a storyteller and guardian of memory. That night, beneath the ancient oak tree, she gathered the villagers once more. With the cracked mirror in hand, she shared the vision she had seen, recounting the lost histories and forgotten sorrows. At first, there was disbelief, then anger, then tears. But as the stories unfolded, a catharsis took root. Together, they began rituals of remembrance, lighting candles, carving names into stone, planting trees to honor the dead. The village became a living memorial, a sanctuary for healing wounds that had festered for centuries. Shadows still lingered at the edges, but they no longer held power over Blackwood. Instead, they became reminders of resilience, of the enduring need to face the past to secure the future. Yet, even as this new chapter began, Ilara could not shake the feeling that the keeper's warning was far from over. Somewhere beyond the forest's edge, other shadows stirred, older, darker, more cunning. The journey to confront and heal them was only just beginning, and Ilara, once a simple healer's daughter, now carried the weight of a legacy that stretched far beyond the borders of Blackwood, into the very heart of darkness itself. As the seasons turned, the village of Blackwood transformed from a place shadowed by fear into a sanctuary of remembrance and hope. Ilara's role had evolved beyond healer or guardian. She was now the keeper of stories, the voice for those long silenced. Yet in the quiet moments, beneath the weight of ancient trees or under the silver gaze of the moon, she felt the ever-present pull of something darker. An ancient force still lurking just beyond sight. One crisp autumn evening, as the village gathered once again around the great oak for their ritual of remembrance, a sudden chill swept through the air. The flickering candle flames trembled and dimmed, and a low, rumbling growl echoed from the depths of the forest. The villagers fell silent, eyes searching the shadows that crept closer with unnatural swiftness. Ilara stepped forward, clutching the cracked mirror that had become her talisman, her heart pounding like a drum. From the darkness, a figure emerged, not the delicate keeper of forgotten things, but a towering silhouette shrouded in black mist, eyes burning with malevolent fire. The ancient shadow god, once banished, had returned, stronger, wiser, and hungry for vengeance. You think your stories and candles can banish me? The shadow god's voice was a terrible storm, shaking the leaves from the trees. Your light is but a flicker in the endless night. I am eternal. I am the hunger beneath the soil, the whisper in the wind, the fear in every heart. Ilara's breath caught, but she stood firm. You may have returned, but you will not claim this place again. The village remembers now. We carry the truth of our past, and that truth will be your undoing. With a sudden roar, the shadow god unleashed a wave of darkness that surged toward the villagers. Panic erupted, but Ilara raised the cracked mirror high. The mirror pulsed with radiant light, absorbing the shadow's assault and reflecting it back in a dazzling blaze. The power of remembrance, of truth and memory, burned through the darkness like a wildfire as the battle raged. The villagers joined Alara, their voices rising in a chorus of names and stories, each word a beacon of light against the shadow. The forest itself seemed to awaken, the ancient trees stretching their limbs to shield the village, their roots entwining to trap the darkness beneath the earth. The shadow god shrieked in fury, but the combined strength of memory and courage was overwhelming. Slowly, the black mist began to unravel, pulling back into the depths from which it came. Alara stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "You have no power here, only in forgotten fears. But we remember, we honor, we live." With a final burst of light from the mirror, the shadow god dissolved into the night, leaving behind only silence and the soft rustle of leaves. Exhausted but victorious, the villagers embraced one another, tears of relief mingling with smiles of triumph. In the weeks that followed, Blackwood flourished like never before. The glade of white flowers bloomed brighter, the stone circle hummed with renewed energy, and the stories told by the fire healed wounds both old and new. Alara knew the darkness would never be fully gone, that it lived in the shadows of every heart. But she also knew that with remembrance and courage, even the deepest shadows could be held at bay. As the first snow of winter fell softly over the village, Alara stood beneath the great oak, the cracked mirror resting in her hands like a promise. The journey had been long, the battles fierce, but at last Blackwood was free, free to live, to remember, and to hope. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the veil of trees and time, the whisper of the forest was no longer a warning, but a song of peace.